Mira Hartfield was found dead among the roots she once studied, her lifeless body twisted between shattered glass and poisonous blooms. Yet the first person on the scene wasn't the intern who discovered her, or the coroner who recorded the time of death. It was Detective Elian Marr, and he got there 2 hours before anyone was supposed to know she was dead. Still Hollow was the kind of town that seemed frozen in time. Tucked between rolling hills and thick woods, it was the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors, where everyone knew each other's names, and where silence came naturally. Most mornings began with a layer of fog blanketing the ground like a quiet warning no one ever took seriously. But on October 17th, the fog didn't lift. Not completely. And by the time the first patrol car arrived at the Hartfield property, the silence had turned into something else. Something colder. Mira Hartfield's home sat on the farthest edge of Still Hollow, where the forest crept in close enough to press shadows against the windows. A well-known botanist, Mira was respected, admired, and in some circles, feared for her knowledge of rare and dangerous plants. Her greenhouse was her sanctuary, a glass cathedral built behind her home, filled with greenery most people couldn't even name. She had no enemies, or so people thought. That morning, Mira's assistant, a college intern named Lena Phelps, arrived at the house to help with an experiment scheduled for 8 a.m. She knocked on the door. No answer. She waited, then walked around the back and entered through the unlocked side of the greenhouse. That's when she found Mira, face down in a bed of soil and broken glass, a ceramic pot shattered beside her. At first, it looked like a tragic accident. But something about the stillness felt wrong. Within the hour, local law enforcement had sealed off the property. The responding officer was Detective Elian Marr, a respected figure in Still Hollow with a nearly spotless record and a reputation for solving things quickly. He arrived at the scene wearing gloves before anyone even mentioned preserving evidence. His eyes were cold and quiet, scanning every inch of the room like he had already solved the case in his head. To everyone else, it seemed like Mira had fallen and hit her head. But Marr noticed what others didn't. A bleach-like smell lingering, near the entrance but nowhere else. Fresh shoe prints in the soil by the path, small, narrow, and unfamiliar, and a recently moved stack of fertilizer bags that concealed the door's broken latch. He crouched beside the body, careful not to disturb anything, and stared at the fine white powder sprinkled lightly along the edge of the greenhouse floor. It wasn't fertilizer, it was ash. Nolan Hartfield, Mira's husband of 17 years, arrived that afternoon. He had been away on a business trip in New York and had the hotel receipts to prove it. His reaction to Mira's death was subdued, controlled. Some said it was shock, others whispered it was guilt. He told police that Mira had become distant. Over the past year, obsessed with something in her work she refused to share with him. He hadn't thought much of it. Mira had always been secretive when working on new projects. When police searched the house, they found no signs of forced entry. But Mira's research journals, 6 leather-bound notebooks she kept stacked on her desk, were missing. Not stolen in a rush, but removed with care. Her laptop was still there, untouched. Her phone had no recent calls, no texts out of the ordinary. It was as if her entire life had been scrubbed clean in one night. Neighbors offered little help. One claimed to have seen a shadow moving near the greenhouse around midnight, but couldn't describe anything beyond tall and quick. Another said they heard a strange sound around the same time, like glass breaking, but assumed it was an animal or wind. The local media quickly labeled it a tragic accident. But Detective Marr didn't agree, not privately. He stood alone in the greenhouse after everyone else had left, staring at the soil where Mira had fallen. There was something beneath the surface of this case, something that didn't belong in the stillness of Still Hollow, something that had waited in the fog for the right moment to strike, and now it had. Tucked beneath the floorboards of Mira Hartfield's office was a clue no one expected to find. It was Lena Phelps, the intern who discovered Mira's body, who first noticed the floorboard was slightly raised near the corner of the desk. She mentioned it in passing to Detective Marr, who returned the next morning to take a closer look. He pried it open gently, expecting dust or maybe forgotten paperwork. What he found instead was a folded, faded photograph, torn along one edge, yellowed with age, and creased from years of handling. In the photo, Mira stood beside a man with sharp features, a hollow gaze, and a faint smile. His arm was draped around her shoulder, but the pose looked stiff, unnatural, as if Mira hadn't wanted to be there. The background was nondescript, a wall, possibly part of a basement or storage room, with peeling paint and shadows stretching long behind them. It wasn't the kind of picture one might frame or display. It was a photo someone wanted to hide. There was something else. On the man's wrist, barely visible beneath the rolled sleeve, was a tattoo. A black serpent coiled around a hollow circle. Its eye was missing, replaced with a dark void. Detective Marr didn't recognize the symbol at first, but something about it tugged at his memory. He scanned the image into the system and sent it through various databases, hoping to catch a match. Meanwhile, he had the symbol sketched and pinned above his desk. Hours later, the system returned a match. The symbol belonged to a long-defunct cult known as the Hollow Eye, a secretive group active in the early 1990s that preached radical ideas about knowledge, enlightenment, and the destruction of dangerous truths. They were known for targeting academics and researchers who disrupted the natural order. After a series of disappearances, suspected murders, and one high-profile fire at a university lab, the cult had seemingly vanished. No arrests had ever been made, and most records had been scrubbed or sealed. The man in the photo was never identified in public documents, but the tattoo connected him to the cult. Detective Marr now had more questions than answers. Mira had never spoken publicly about any involvement with the Hollow Eye, but her academic history showed a gap, 2 years unaccounted for between her graduate studies and her first official university posting. Records from that time were sparse. Too sparse. Digging deeper, Marr uncovered an unpublished manuscript in Mira's cloud drive, half-written, cryptic, and never submitted for review. It mentioned a threshold of truth and knowledge too old to hold. The writing was fragmented, paranoid, and laced with references to old mythologies, botany, and a group she called the Sleepers. It was never meant for publication. It was a warning. More curious still, Mira had been ordering obscure books, many of them dealing with poisonous plants, alchemy, and ancient cult practices. Most were delivered in secret, using a private mailbox outside of town. One receipt led investigators to a rare book dealer who claimed Mira had been looking for a volume titled The Root of All Silence, a text rumored to be written by the founder of the Hollow Eye himself. The book had been banned decades earlier for its alleged link to academic deaths in Europe. It was no longer possible to dismiss Mira's death as accidental. Whatever she had uncovered, or remembered, had drawn something back into her life. Something dangerous. She had hidden the photograph, knowing someone might one day find it. Maybe she hoped it would explain what she couldn't say aloud. Detective Marr couldn't shake the feeling that the photograph wasn't a relic of the past. It was a message from someone very much alive. And somewhere out there, the man in the picture was watching. A week after Mira Hartfield's funeral, the town of Still Hollow was just beginning to return to normal, or at least pretend to. The greenhouse had been sealed off, the local press had lost interest, and the whispers that followed Nolan Hartfield through town had quieted to a dull murmur. But the case was far from closed. For Detective Elian Marr, the discovery of the photograph had shifted everything. Mira's death was no longer a mystery in isolation. It was part of something larger, older, and far more deliberate. Then came the second body. It was found 30 miles outside of Still Hollow, near River Point Dam. A man had drowned, his body tangled in reeds along the rocky bank. At first glance, it appeared to be a suicide. No signs of trauma, no witnesses. A car was found abandoned nearby with the keys still in the ignition. In the glove compartment, police found a burned ID card, its edges singed beyond recovery. But the man's fingerprints were still intact. His name was Kalen Dross. The name didn't mean much to anyone in Still Hollow, but a search into his history revealed something chilling. Kalen had once been affiliated with the Hollow Eye. Arrested in 1997 for attempted arson at a university in Pennsylvania, Kalen had tried to destroy a lab that housed historical religious texts and rare plant specimens. He had served 4 years in prison, then vanished from public records. No work history, no fixed address. Just silence. His connection to Mira was thin but unmistakable. That same university had once hosted a guest lecture by a then-unknown Mira Hartfield, who had presented a talk titled Plants of Knowledge and Power, Botanical Lore in Pre-Modern Rituals. The lecture had been poorly attended and never recorded, but it was enough of a link for Mar to dig deeper. The autopsy on Kalen Dross revealed water in the lungs, suggesting he was alive when he hit the water, but also something more alarming. Traces of a rare alkaloid compound were found in his bloodstream, derived from a plant so obscure that only one person in the area would have known how to extract it properly. Mira Hartfield. It was the same compound later confirmed as the cause of her own death. This changed everything. It was no longer possible to consider Mira's death as the beginning of the story. It was a middle chapter in something much more dangerous. Kalen Dross had known something he was either running from or trying to expose. But someone had gotten to him first, and someone wanted him silenced. Detective Mar retraced Kalen's final days, piecing together bank transactions, phone records, and surveillance footage. One grainy video from a roadside diner showed Kalen eating alone, nervously scanning the windows. In another clip from a gas station, he was seen stuffing something into a locker. Mar got a warrant and retrieved the contents. Inside the locker was a leather-bound notebook, water-stained and fraying at the edges. It was filled with fragmented notes, hand-drawn symbols, and cryptic instructions. One passage stood out. She found the pattern. It was buried in the roots. They'll come for her. If I don't reach her first, it's already too late. There was no question now. Mira had been targeted, not because of who she was, but because of what she had discovered. Her work, her silence, even her secrecy. They weren't signs of paranoia. They were signs of fear. Someone had used her own tools against her. Someone with knowledge. Someone who had walked the same paths she had once studied. The pieces were connecting, slowly. Mira and Kalen had shared a secret world. But while Mira had tried to document it, Kalen had tried to destroy it. And now they were both dead. The evidence room at Still Hollow's police department was small, tucked away in the building's basement with flickering lights and metal shelves stacked with neatly labeled boxes. It wasn't a place anyone spent much time unless they had to. But on the third week of Mira Hartfield's investigation, it became the center of everything. Veda Wren, a junior analyst recently assigned to the case, had been combing through digital files and hard copies, cross-referencing every piece of evidence collected from Mira's property. It was tedious work, scanning documents, comparing timestamps, cataloging inconsistencies, but Veda was meticulous. And it was her attention to detail that uncovered what would turn the case upside down. While reviewing a set of crime scene photographs taken the morning Mira's body was discovered, Veda noticed something odd. One of the photos, showing the exterior of the greenhouse, had a timestamp that didn't match the others. It was off by almost 2 hours. Curious, she pulled the original camera files from the digital forensics server. There it was, the same image but with a different timestamp and a slightly wider crop. In the unedited version, parked just behind a row of bushes near the greenhouse, was a car. A dark gray sedan with a cracked rear bumper. Detective Elion. Mar's car. It was unmistakable. He had driven it to every scene, every town meeting, and every press conference. And now it appeared at Mira Hartfield's home 2 hours before the official call to emergency services was placed. According to Mar's own report, he hadn't arrived until 9:22 a.m., after Lena Phelps had discovered the body and phoned the sheriff's office. But this photo suggested he had already been there before anyone else even knew Mira was dead. Veda flagged the file and reported it to her supervisor. A quiet internal inquiry began that same afternoon. As department protocol required, Mar was informed and asked to step away from the case until the discrepancy could be reviewed. He nodded calmly, handed in his badge for temporary suspension, and left without protest. By the following morning, he had vanished. His phone was turned off. His apartment was unlocked but undisturbed. No sign of forced entry, no signs of struggle. The only thing missing was a single suitcase. Everything else remained: his wallet, his personal files, even his service weapon. But in his backyard, beneath the base of a rose bush, investigators found something buried. A metal lockbox, old and rusted, wrapped in layers of cloth and plastic. Inside were the 6 missing research journals of Mira Hartfield, neatly stacked, beside a small glass vial labeled with a chemical compound, the same toxin found in both Mira's and Calendros's autopsies. Also inside were newspaper clippings from the 1990s, detailing unexplained academic deaths, fires at university labs, and suspected cult activity. Every article was marked in red ink, with handwritten notes in the margins, notes that matched Mar's handwriting. He hadn't just been hiding evidence, he had been studying it. Investigators began to cross-reference old personnel records and discovered that Mar had attended the same university where the Hollow Eye had been active. He had dropped out suddenly and reappeared in Still Hollow years later with a falsified transcript. His entire career, his identity, had been built on a carefully constructed foundation of lies. The truth was simple and horrifying. The man leading the investigation had been involved in the very events it sought to uncover. He had arrived at the crime scene before anyone else, because he hadn't just been the first to find Mira Hartfield. He had been the one who killed her, and now, with the truth unraveling, he was gone. The manhunt for Detective Elian Mar stretched far beyond Still Hollow. State agencies, federal investigators, and independent analysts all joined the search. Mar had left behind no digital trail, no GPS pings, no credit card activity, no confirmed sightings. It was as if he had slipped between the cracks of the world. Authorities feared he had crossed borders under a false identity. Others quietly believed he was dead. But there were still those who knew better, those who had followed the cult's history long enough to recognize what silence really meant. 3 weeks after his disappearance, something unexpected surfaced in the rural outskirts of Hastings County, nearly 100 miles from Still Hollow. A fire had gutted a long-abandoned farmhouse. Firefighters found no survivors, but inside the charred wreckage, investigators discovered a hidden basement. The walls were covered in symbols etched in soot. A scorched metal desk held a stack of papers that had survived the flames. Among them were pages torn from Mira Hartfield's journals, annotated and edited in a different handwriting. Mar's handwriting. The note suggested he had been trying to reconstruct a process described in Mira's work, something she had called the reversal route, a phrase that appeared multiple times across her journals. It wasn't a plant, but a method, a process of memory manipulation using botanical compounds and psychological conditioning. Mira's early notes described it as theoretical. Her later notes sounded terrified. She wrote of voices in her sleep, blackouts, and missing time. She believed someone had used the process on her, someone she once knew, someone who had returned. The handwriting in Mar's annotations grew increasingly erratic across the pages. His words hinted at a loss of control, as if the very act of reading the journals had begun to undo him. Phrases like, "They were always," "inside me," and "I remembered too late," repeated again and again until the writing dissolved into scribbles. Then came the most disturbing discovery. Buried in the ashes of the farmhouse, beneath the desk, investigators found a sealed envelope, addressed in Mira's handwriting. It was dated 2 weeks before her death. Inside was a single page. No greeting, no farewell. Just one sentence. "If he finds this before I do, he is not who you think he is." That single sentence shattered the last piece of the illusion. Mira had known. She had known Elian Marr was dangerous, that he was tied to the cult, that he was watching her, maybe even guiding her research in the background. And yet, for reasons no one could fully understand, she never went to the police. Never told anyone directly. Perhaps she had hoped to reverse the damage on her own. Perhaps she still believed there was a part of Marr worth saving. But she had underestimated him. They all had. 2 months passed with no confirmed sighting of Marr. Still, Hollow began to move on, burying the chaos beneath the routine of daily life. The greenhouse was torn down. Mira's estate was quietly sold. People stopped asking questions. They always do. Then, late one evening, Lena Phelps, Mira's former intern, received a package on her doorstep. No return address. Inside was one of Mira's missing journals. But this one was different. It had never been cataloged with the others. The final page was fresh, unaged, written in a hurried scrawl. It read, "He is trying again. A different name, a different place. If you are reading this, he has already arrived." The handwriting was Mira's. The ink was still wet. And in the reflection of the window beside her, Lena thought, for just a moment, she saw someone standing at the edge of the street, watching. Not moving, not speaking, just waiting. The story was not over. It had only begun again.